Hey guys, and welcome back to more Magic Origin spoilers. I'm Simon, and I'd like to start off with a correction. Yesterday I posted my, well, overly generous expectations of the release of Honored Hierarch. After reading the comments, its faults started to become more clear. I was really excited to see this kind of ability with the renowned mechanic, and I guess I jumped a little too hard in front of the hype train. While I still think it can be a great one-drop in some aggro decks, it may be worse of a mana dork than I previously thought. I'll concede to you guys out there. If your opponent can block this guy on turn 2, or if you get him in the late game, he's basically a trash card. But I'm telling you, someone out there is gonna find success with this guy. Okay, moving on, we got some new common spoilers today, introducing the Relentless Rats variety pack. Well, kinda sorta, at least that's the vibe I get from this latest rounds of Magic Origin spoilers. These 5 cards, one for each color, all have some kind of interaction with other cards that share its name. First we have the white version here, Cleric of the Forward Order. It's a 2/2 human cleric for 1 white and 1 colorless. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life for each creature you control named Cleric of the Forward Order. So this card is probably one of the weaker released in this bunch. It's a 2/2 for 2, which basically heals you for 2 when it comes into play. Since it doesn't state other creatures you control named Cleric of the Forward Order, I assume the Summon Cleric counts as one you already control. In a best case scenario, you can gain a total of 20 life over a game with a playset of this guy, but that's probably unlikely. This card is actually pretty decent in its own right, and maybe running a playset of it isn't optimal. Plus, I think it's a decent pick for drafts. But if you do decide to run a playset, you better be mindful of that Tainted Remedy counter. Next we have Infectious Bloodlust, an enchantment for 1 colorless and 1 red, which gives a creature +2/+1, haste, and forces it to attack each turn if able. When the enchanted creature dies, search your library for a card named Infectious Bloodlust, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. It's like Goblin Warpaint that forever pulls itself out of your deck. This card's gonna be good for aggro, even though it forces your guys to attack each turn, which could be good or bad depending on the board state. It's decent because it's cheap haste and power. If you run a playset of it, the benefits only grow. Since you gain more the more you run of it in a deck, it loses points in the draft game. But still, it's really not awful. So now let's take a look at the green, not as good version of Relentless Rats. This is Timberpack Wolf, which is a 2/2 wolf creature for 1 colorless and 1 green mana. It gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control, named Timberpack Wolf. Wizards just loves printing wolves that buff other wolves, don't they? I mean, just make a wolf tribe already. Well, I guess werewolves were a thing. I'm getting off track. So this card is pretty straightforward, but in its simplicity, I believe it kinda loses out in comparison to these other commons. A 2/2 for 2 isn't awful, especially because it has the ability to improve. I mean, in a perfect world, you'd always have 4 5/5 wolves in play. But games are never perfect, and it's always more difficult to keep creatures on the board just for the sole purpose of buffing them with other creatures. Still, I'd probably try this guy out, but don't ever think this card will be good in draft. In that environment, always look at this guy as a plain 2/2. Next up, let's look at Undead Servant, a 3/2 zombie creature for 3 colorless and 1 black mana. When Undead Servant enters the battlefield, put a 2/2 zombie token onto the battlefield for each card named Undead Servant in your graveyard. Again, this card really benefits you the more of them you have in your deck. The good thing about this guy is that you don't have to actually keep your other Undead Servants alive to get the benefit, which makes it more likely to pay off. It is, however, the most expensive common of this variety, but I believe it's the most likely to find a home in a specific deck. Reanimator decks will love throwing this guy into the graveyard, and will more often than not be able to summon an Undead Servant with 3 extra 2/2 tokens with it. Lastly, we come to my personal favorite here, Faerie Miscreant, which is a 1/1 fairy rogue with flying for 1 blue mana. Whenever Faerie Miscreant enters the battlefield, if you control another creature named Faerie Miscreant, draw a card. Unlike the other cards mentioned, this guy doesn't really get better with the more you have in your deck. Other than increasing the likelihood the effect will actually go off, you can only ever draw 1 card when you play a Faerie Miscreant, no matter how many you already have in play. Of course, the more you play, the more cards you'll draw, but that's besides the point. What's great about Faerie Miscreant is that it's a flyer for 1 mana. It's cheap evasion with a huge upside. I mean, card advantage can easily decide a winner. But unlike most of these other cards, this guy is really decent on its own. I'd draft this guy all day, every day, and although it's kinda bland and boring, I'm sure it'll find its way into decks. So there you go guys, a first look at these new, self-interested cards from Magic Origins. I haven't seen more cards which benefited from other similar cards since Ally decks. Allies confirmed Battle for Zendikar. Anyway, let me know what you guys think of these common spoilers in the comments below. Remember, keep it honest, it's the only way I'll ever learn anything new. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, share, and sub to the channel. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.